um, asking you to be on standby yesterday and then having to pull out because the cabinet issues would not have permitted me to have been as comfortable with you the time that you may want to have. So, and in the intervening period, I've got a little more information. So, I want to say today that the last time we met in one of these situations in organizing the public information routine, you will recall that I did say that we would shift from our daily report, stabilize to almost repeating the same numbers day after day after day. And we said that if there are any changes warranting a change in the schedule or coming outside of that Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, we would immediately inform you and we would come to the public and resume as we have to let you know where we at and what is required of us. And today is one such day. You would have been informed that we had had some changes in the numbers in the last few days, and in the last 48 hours, the changes have been much more than we had become accustomed to for the last 6 to 8 weeks. What does that mean? What I will do today, I would just reinforce for you what we are doing in Trinidad and Tobago with respect to our national response to the virus. Then the Minister of Health and CMO Parasram would give us the up-to-date report. We have the other doctors here who can fill in as required. When the daily medical report is presented, and you would have had that information and be in a better position to ask questions of me and others, I will come back and I will tell you what the decisions are with respect to how we respond to the changes that you would have been informed about, and if there are any changes to be announced, and answer any questions that you may have as we dive deeper into understanding what is happening. So let me get back to what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago. One, we took our virus threat very seriously, and we at the Ministry of Health made significant preparations to put the country in a position to treat with infections from the virus, because that is what the virus does. It infects people, it makes them ill. Most of them are not requiring hospitalization. Some require hospitalization. I think the number that I'm familiar with is 18% or something like that. And of course, of those who require hospitalization, a smaller percentage can get to serious and critical stages requiring critical care in the hospitals. So we prepared our hospitals to treat with people who might become infected and might become ill and would require that level and depth of hospital care and constant inpatient training, caring. And of course, we prepared to handle people who require to be isolated in the event that they may be carrying the virus or are carrying the virus and have to be kept away from other people so that we do not multiply the number of persons infected by person-to-person contact. So we built what we call the parallel health system. Unfortunately, we had two relatively new hospitals, one which was new and was operating for a while, the other one that was brand new and had not operated, and a third one which was just completed and was put on standby. I talk about Couva Hospital, which was in operation for about a year and a half, and Arima Hospital, which was brand new, ready for operation, and Point 14 that the contractor was just about to hand over to us. So these three hospitals were available. We put those into a parallel system, and other aspects of we also had Cora, which is a standard area for infections of this nature, and other things. And we got other levels of accommodation to hold people who might not have been infected, but they need to be quarantined, and you don't mix them with persons who have a higher level of risk and so on. So we have this system in place, and we still have that system in place. And the reason why we told you we'll come back to you and change our schedule, our daily reporting schedule, or every other day as the case might be, is because we expected that the nature of the problem that we are facing, that it is quite possible and likely that we could move away from a situation of having nothing additional to report to reporting that we do have additional infections. We also embarked on bringing home very carefully, in a managed way, in the context of how we can quarantine people, those persons who were caught abroad and who wanted to come back home and would have expressed so by virtue of an application for an exemption, because we closed our borders, and to come in or to go out, you require an exemption to do that access to the country or to egress out of the country. And that, I'll come back to that and say a few words about that a little later on in the proceedings. So that is in place. So now that we have had the reports of changes in the numbers of persons reported as having been infected by the virus, and that number would have jumped from 1 to 2 to what the CMO will tell us in a little while, we are in a slightly different situation, but we are not in a situation as the public might think, but our circumstances change a little bit, and I would leave the details of that to CMO to go into where we've come from, where we're at, and where we're going, and where we have not reached yet. But you know, the public, once the public is paying attention, the public gets very educated and sometimes jumps ahead of the scientists. I remember when I was working on volcanoes in a similar situation, we, the scientists, would be talking on radio about something called a hornblende, which is a crystal that is found in volcanic rocks and has some significance to the scientists. And the people on the radio, the two-way radio, were hearing that. And very soon, every time we go to the press conference like this, we were grilled about the greenhouse blend. And everybody thought it was a blend of coffee, when in fact it was really a crystal called hornblende. But here in Trinidad and Tobago, everybody now talks about community spread, and there's an element of anxiety over community spread in the context. And that's a good thing, because I get the impression that people are aware that the threat of community spread is there, and its arrival signals a significant change in our status. So let me ask the medical minister and medical team, Dr. Parasram, to take the floor and give us our date or today's update.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. If you'll permit me, I will go into the daily report with the numbers. Dr. Hines will then follow with the community tracking events thus far, and Dr. Trotman will come in after the public health measures we would like to see enforced going forward. So in terms of the clinical update for Friday, 31st July 2020, the numbers are as follows. The tests done thus far in the public sector, University of the West Indies and Caribbean Public Health Agency, now stand at 7,716. Total number of unique patient tests, 6,145. Total number of repeated tests, 1,571. Community tests have been going up significantly and now stands at 3,682. Tests done in the private sector as of the 24th of July, 1,789, giving us a total of 9,505. Total number of positive cases thus far now go up to 169. Total number of discharges stay at 132. Total number of deaths remain at 8. And the number of patients now at the various facilities, which is Cora and Couva, are 29, with 28 of those individuals at the Cora facility, 1 person at the Couva Medical and Multi-Training Facility, previously in a high dependency unit, is now back on a ward basis, so there has been significant clinical improvement in that person's status. As it relates to our quarantine sites, so as you know, we continue to repatriate our nationals, and in our quarantine facilities at this time we have 123 persons spread between various facilities. So those facilities are similar numbers to yesterday. I don't want to go into too much detail as to the numbers for various facilities, but they remain the same as yesterday's report. I want to focus a little more on the community part of it, where Dr. Hines will tell us we are seeing a change in an evolution in the epidemic in Trinidad and Tobago. So we are going from, as you know, we are listed as WHO sporadic cases, which means cases occurring intermittently, whether it be imported or otherwise, in various localities without any link to each other. We are going into a situation where we have clusters of cases. Clusters of cases meaning that you have geographically linked cases that may be linked to one or more cases and forming clusters in terms of both geography as well as in terms of time. So Dr. Hines will give you an update, basically going from case 139 to 1 to present, to let you know how those cases are classified. Some of them will be classified in terms of imported, coming out of the quarantine sites, which, as you know, doesn't have a great impact on population level control. Some of them will be classified as induced, meaning some contact with importation. Others may be classified as local, and others may be classified as pending investigation. So, Dr. Hines, just to give us an update.
Thank you, CMO, Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, colleagues, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. Following on from what Dr. Parasram has just described, I want to give a little bit of a breakdown regarding the cases that we would have identified between case 139, identified as our first case under investigation, down to case 169, giving us 31 cases that I'm going to account for by various categories. I'll start with the easiest category, which is out of those 31, 7 of those would have been persons repatriated and therefore brought in through the quarantine mechanisms and not contributing to the possibility of onward transmission because of all the protocols that are in place and that are employed during that repatriation process. Then there are at least 4 groups that we want to look at. There is a group, one family cluster of 6 persons, where the first person in that grouping, we do not have a clear epidemiologic link to where they would have picked their infection up, but they spawned a primary cluster, including themselves, of 6 persons within the family, and 2 secondary clusters, one within a school setting and then one within family friend setting, just underscoring the transmissibility of the virus with general social interaction. Another cluster would have accounted for another 4, actually 5 persons, one of whom we're not sure exactly where they would have gotten their initial infection, but in this cluster there were at least 3 persons that were hanging out, so to speak, at a bar. And those 3 contribute to the second grouping that we want to speak about, of initial case and primary contacts transferring or becoming infected and becoming additional cases. There were a couple cases where the exposure appears to have been within the workplace, and within those settings, what we found is, on investigation, one of the key findings, one of the key bits of feedback is something of a lapse with regard to some of the personal and preventive mechanisms, hygiene protocols, masks, etc., that weren't 100% followed and adhered to in the way that we've been emphasizing. So again, in communicating with that group, the importance of those measures was underscored. And then we have at least 4 individuals that we do not have a clear epidemiologic link to, but that did not necessarily spread to anyone else. Active contact tracing is going on for each of these identified cases, identifying family members, workplaces, other places they may have visited, and as situations are identified that require additional public health measures, those measures are taken, including closure of places of exposure, closure of business places, schools were potentially affected, and the rapid swabbing and feedback to the persons who have been affected or so affected, along with the implementation of the 14-day quarantine as needed. So as we identify these positives, whether they're in a known cluster or whether we are still pending investigation of where they originally were identified, going forward, their contacts are identified, their contacts are quarantined, and relevant swabbing and feedback is done as we attempt to get ahead of the chains of transmission. I think I will terminate there and hand over to Dr. Trotman, who will give a little more information regarding the clinical side of things and what we want to emphasize.
Honorable Prime Minister, ministers, colleagues, members of the viewing public, members of the media, it's my pleasure to again grab your attention and hopefully supersede the attention of the virus to give you the artillery that is needed to fight the virus. The good news is we have that same information of the 3 cornerstones that we need to fight the virus. We are learning a lot. We are growing a lot. Things are changing a lot. But there are 3 things that are remaining the same. Sanitize, distance, social distancing, and wear your masks. Those 3 cornerstones for now are the things that we have that not will, but can beat and fight the virus. This is what will prevent us from having any type of spread. Sanitizing, distancing, and wearing your masks. We cannot, because we are in a particular position where things look good, we can't forget those things. It's like you forget to put on your shoes. It's like you forget to wear your glasses. You cannot forget those things. They are the cornerstone. To sanitize, distance, and wear your masks. We have a responsibility as healthcare workers. We have a responsibility as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. But we have a responsibility as human beings to do those things. And when people are not doing it, to encourage them to do so. If we work, and when we work as a team, to ensure that we do those 3 things, the virus, even when it shows its crown, will not be able to penetrate to cause disease. As long as we do those 3 basic things, while we await vaccines and other things, we have those things now. Sanitize, and we've had extensive measures. We see it around business places, we see it in our own homes, we see it in our workplaces. All of the provisions are there for us to use to sanitize. I know that we are a culture that likes to talk and touch and feel, but for now, we can't. I have to tell you, some of my colleagues see me and I have to run. Michelle, and I have to run because I don't want to be embraced. We can't at this point. It's hard. I miss it. We all miss it. Yeah?
Thank you, Doctor,
Yes.
for your spirited exhortation to the population at the personal level. We constantly look at our situation, and based on where we at now, we are required to focus on what has been our response at an earlier time, and the same situation arises now. What we are required to do is to reduce the exposure of the population and the movement of people. If we're able to do that, that is a tool in confronting the arrival of cluster. situations. We now are genuinely treating with clusters in one or two areas. Fortunately, the system we have in place and they put in place is working. We told you before how we will function when the virus appears in this way by using our contact investigations, following people around, looking for their contacts, and tracing person to person. And it is through that that we are able to see who has been in contact with whom, who is testing positive, who is negative on the test, and so on. So that system is working. But we have now to respond, and we are going to respond, not through panic or through overreaction, but we would respond now to reducing the amount of contact that is likely to happen. And to do so, we would go back from the groups permitted, groups of 25, going back to a permitting of groups of 10. So we will change the regulation and reduce the number of people who are congregating or allowed to congregate. So that is the fundamental response of reducing the amount of persons exposed. I think maybe when you ask your questions, Dr. Parasham will go into a little more detail as to what's the primary source and an unknown source, and who we know has the virus. And we know that we don't know that there are people, we know that there are people who have it who we don't know. Right? And that is where we have to be concerned about the population moving out in large numbers. So what we need to do at this stage is to slow down the movement and the mixing and the size of groups that are out there. That will deny the virus the easiest way to get between people. It will reduce the amount of exposure of the population. So we go back to approving congregations of groups of 10. But we will maintain our protocols like the numbers at funerals, numbers indoors, numbers in churches where you observe the wearing of the mask and the social distancing. We're not changing any of that. So the next thing we do is that we would ask the public service, through communication between the CMO's office and the public service groups under the permanent secretaries, to reduce the amount of public servants who are out at any one time. And the way to do that is to either have them come to work alphabetically or rotate them by days for the next 14 days, next 2 weeks, and see if we see anything that warrants further response. If nothing appears that requires a response, and we come back to where we are now. But for the next 14 work days, we will ask the permanent secretaries to do that rotation, which will reduce the population of people out in the street and out among themselves by approximately 50%. Those two actions, we believe, is sufficient for the moment to reduce the population exposure at a stage of clusters. We are very concerned, having looked at where the known people who are infected in the last few days, where they got their infections. 2 places. 1, school, and 2, bars. And these are 2 areas that we knew before were areas that were of concern to us because of the nature of the activity. The detailed scientific study done by Dr. Hines and his team would have identified the one instance where the person of a household is infected, a child from the household goes to school and infects children in the school. We thought very deeply about that and we weighed it on all sides, and we believe at this time today, even while we are here, we got additional information of another school which had to be closed because the contact tracing, has taken us to another school which now requires to be closed. But we believe that we would keep that STA exercise on watch for another few days. And if this trend continues in any significant way in the next day or next couple of days, Monday or Tuesday, we will have to act on the school system. But we have that operation that is going on with a view to having the exam on the 20th of August. We're going to keep that under watch for the moment, active watch, as the contact tracing exercise goes on. The same thing with bars. We have bars and restaurants. We have found direct links between persons being infected in bars, and we will keep the availability of bars and restaurants under very close watch for the next few days. And by that I mean anytime we get further information that this continues to be recorded as happening, we will act to further reduce the population's exposure. We are also, at this stage, keeping public transport under watch, and that may require intervention if we continue on this path within the next 72 hours or thereabouts into next week. And of course, what we're trying to do is to balance the level of risk with rewards. There's a reward for keeping the country activated, but there are risks in having so many people out in an environment where we have to report ourselves as being a nation with community, with clusters. We are not at the stage of reporting as community spread. It's not community spread. And you may want to quiz Dr. Parasram on that when he stands up in a little while. But I'll tell you something which I think you should know. As I was managing this situation at an earlier time in our experience, when New York was under that horrible experience, I was in contact with some people in another part of the United States which had, for a while, not have reports of any exposure, confirmations. And then, in a matter of days, they were reporting their first confirmations and the growth of the numbers of confirmations of COVID. And then, in a matter of a couple of weeks, there was an explosion in that state. And they went from basically where we are now, knowing that the virus had entered, knowing that there were a few people who were positive. In fact, some people were even resisting believing that people were testing positive. And within a matter of a fortnight, they got themselves in a situation where the health system was seriously challenged. And by the third week, into the fourth week, the health system had collapsed. And I asked the doctors then, who were actively treating with patients at the collapse stage, where there were so many patients requiring hospitalization and requiring ventilators and so on. I asked them, when they were reporting that they had lost control of the situation. And the question I asked them is, when did you think you lost control? And they answered that question pointing to a period like this, where we are right now, where mathematically it is possible for us to move from where we are now to large numbers in a very short space of time if we are not able to suppress the growth of the virus in the population. So the question was, if you were going to avoid arriving at the point where the health system is overwhelmed, what was required to be done and when was that to be done? And the answer has to be that you act now as firmly as you can to ensure that you don't allow a free run of the virus to a state where there are so many people infected that whatever health system you have in place or put in place is overcome by the number of people who require health care and advanced care in the hospitals. So we are at that stage now where we're required to take the kinds of steps that I've just mentioned, focusing on reducing the amount of people who are exposed. And if we get the result that we expect that we'll get, then we can manage our risk in that way going forward. If on the other hand, having done what I've just said, we continue to get the numbers that we're seeing going forward, we will have to take more drastic action. But we are not at that stage now. But what we must take comfort in is that in Trinidad and Tobago, we are managing a situation. The situation is not managing us. We are managing a situation. And as long as the population continues to cooperate and to cooperate even more, that management will remain effective. The management that I speak about could become useless if, one, we don't cooperate with what Dr. Trotman just spoke about. Two, we do not get effective law enforcement, because remember, we are all acting here under the Public Health Ordinance, and it requires law enforcement. And law enforcement will be required in Trinidad and Tobago and is required to ensure that the gentle things that we say we ought to do must be done. If people are going to attempt to congregate in larger numbers, and that includes political parties, then law enforcement must act, not out of a punishment mode, but out of a preservation mode, in order to protect the population. So from tomorrow, we expect that we would go back to the numbers of 10, and we expect that the political parties engage. It shouldn't be a problem for many political parties, the ones with only a maxi full of people. But others will have to, political parties, and I'm appealing here to political leaders in the various political parties to ensure that your campaigning does not include the making of crowds and the gathering of crowds outside beyond 10. Fortunately, the campaign is well advanced. We only have a few days left, and we will take those steps to ensure that the numbers don't go in any spiral upwards. And the same thing to do with bars. Bars are left open for the moment, but and restaurants, but we expect that there would be serious law enforcement around these establishments. And I am still to wonder why, given the level of lack of cooperation that some people seem to be hell-bent on demonstrating, why I'm not reading that the odd person here and there has been dragged before the magistrate to explain their conduct and to pay the appropriate fines. I am doing my job as Prime Minister in this matter, and I expect that other people will do their jobs. If there are people who decide that this is a joke, they must be made to understand that it is not a joke, and it is not a dare and double dare, and it's not machismo, it's common sense. I was in South Trinidad recently, and I'm saddened to report that the population in South Trinidad is not taking this matter seriously. The impression is being given that that is somebody else's problem, or worse, it's another side's politics. That is what is going to get us into serious trouble, because this virus is no respecter of persons, race, color, creed, class, religion, or politics. So we need to get on board. We have moved from sporadic to where we always expect that might happen, which is to having some clusters. We are tracing people around. Our system is working, but the system is telling us that there are sources out there that we are not in control of. We don't know who is the origin of some of these people's problems. So it means that they would have got the virus from somebody unknown to us. And of course, that brings me to the entry of persons from outside Trinidad and Tobago or nationals abroad. We have, in closing the border, we have created a situation of allowing exemptions. I could tell you that we've had requests and have granted exemptions to persons coming from 40 countries into Trinidad and Tobago. 40 countries persons have come from into Trinidad and Tobago. We have also taken at public expense, in most cases, the position that once you come in from outside, you will remain under state control in quarantine. And that goes a long way in ensuring that the risk of being infected by persons coming in from outside is considerably reduced, if not eliminated. And that state quarantine is what has been controlling the rate at which we have been bringing people in. That has been accelerated a bit by persons who, in special circumstances, who come in and pay for their own quarantine, and that allowed a larger number to come in, mainly oil company workers, and so on. Now, the last time I spoke in response to a question that was put to me from the floor, the question was, how many people are wanting to come home? And I said at the time that we had approximately 8,000 plus persons, and if we round it off to 10,000, given the time that has passed since the border has been closed and persons have been having their requests in, it appears as though it's approximately persons wanting to go out, persons wanting to come in, approximately 10,000 persons. Today I've got the actual figures because I did ask for those the specific numbers from the Ministry of National Security. And these are the actual numbers of what we're dealing with in terms of persons applying to go out and persons applying to come in. With respect to persons applying, now the borders are closed. You may want to ask why people have to ask to go out. The reason being that the border is closed. So permission has to be granted for it to be open for you to go out. And in many cases, you have to bring your own transport in, and that has to be exempted, and then you board your transport and go out. So it's a managed process on both ways. Total number of individuals who applied to leave Trinidad and Tobago as of July 29th, which is yesterday, day before? Yes, day before. As of July 29th, 5,580 persons who were in Trinidad and Tobago but wanted to go out had applied. Now, having applied, even if you get an exemption, the next question is, where do I get transport to go out? And most persons who went out had to organize their own transport, and a lot of the embassies and so on had organized transport. Total number of exemptions granted, that is persons who are actually, got clearance to go, and that 3,556. Individuals who applied to leave and are finalizing travel arrangements, right? So those persons applied. Once they get the exemption, they are there making all kinds of arrangements, mainly air transport to go out, 2,024. So for those on the going out story, 5,580. But more interestingly, the more important data is the total number of individuals who applied to enter Trinidad and Tobago as at July 29, 2020. That figure is 5,539. Total number of exemptions granted to enter, 2,250. Individuals who applied to enter and who are currently awaiting exemptions, 3,289. You would have heard the opposition leader accusing the government of making stateless and abandoning 10,000 people. Now you understand where the figure of 10,000 come from. It is not 10,000 people knocking on the door outside to come in that you have abandoned according to them. The figure of 10,000 has to do with the 5,000 who want to go out and the approximately 5,000 who want to come in. And from the 5,000 who want to come in, we've already brought in 2,250. And there are others in the pipeline to come in. National Security may be able to tell you who is in the pipeline and who's next and so on. And the situation there is that of the figure 5,539, as the exemptions are granted, first preference is given to people who are domiciled in Trinidad and Tobago, who have a good reason to want to come back in, either because they are ill or they need medical attention, or they've been out of medical attention, they have small children, their age. What has not been given priority in this manual scheme are persons who really don't live here, but decide to come here at this time. Such a person on interview will not be at the top of the list coming in. So that's why you would see 5,539, but some of those people are not ordinarily domiciled in Trinidad and Tobago, and those are not at the front of the list to come in, given the attempt to bring home people who genuinely live here. So those are the numbers, and there's no case of 10,000 people out there. We're managing now 3,289, and we're bringing them in by the hundreds. And of course, given where we're at now with the increase in numbers and our keeping our eyes open on what is possible in Trinidad and Tobago if things go wrong, that we can have a lot of people here sick with the virus and occupying our hospital spaces, well then we have to be a little more cautious about how we bring people in. And from a geographical standpoint, I don't know if you all are aware that the main contact between Trinidad and Tobago and the United States is Florida. And that is exactly now where COVID is probably at its highest rate anywhere in the world. The world's highest intensity of the spread of the virus is now in Florida. So that says something for Trinidad and Tobago, and we are managing that. So far we brought in from the United States 548 people, right? And we brought in 417 from cruise ships, 130 from Jamaica, and 126 from Barbados, which are mainly our children who are at university out there. And we brought people in from all over the world. I have not seen those who were in India, because that was quite a challenge to get. We have 17? Number 18? Oh yes, number 17. We brought in 18 people from India. They have had quite a journey to get here, passing through more than one or two countries to get here in some instances. So the process of repatriation of people is ongoing. It's an integral part of our management of our virus threat. And I just want the population to know that and not be misled by people screaming about numbers that mean nothing and are just exciting the population for no good reason. So basically, that is where we are. We are in pretty much of a watch mode on some decisions to be made if things continue to go in a certain direction, and we've made some decisions which are not inconsequential, but decisions made within the policy that we're following. You would also know, you probably would have heard people raising issues about the amount of testing being done in the country. We are not testing for testing's sake. The testing program is part of the management of the situation, and we rely very heavily on our contact tracing part of the program, where if presentations are made of confirmations, then we step on those situations by extensive contact tracing, and that is what is going on now. And that's why Dr. Hines could have told us what he just told us, because he knows that's the result of the contact tracing, and we'll do more and more contact tracing. But contact tracing has its drawbacks in that there are people who may not want to cooperate. And you may ask yourself, how come and why? Answer is very simple. Our people, Trinidad and Tobago people, will just decide to be difficult. The contact tracing is for your own benefit. It's for your own protection. It is not an intrusion into your constitutional rights, as some people want to shout. It is to preserve your life and the life of your family and your community. And the information that you would share with the investigators, it might look like unimportant information to you and they're prying for no good reason. But that information is an information that has to do with life and death. So we also know at this point in time that there's no group of persons who is exempt from the virus. All groups, all ages, children, adults, some people are more vulnerable than others, but there's no group of citizens that's exempt by virtue of age or otherwise. So I think the point has been made that this is an issue of interest to all of us, and we simply asking for the cooperation of the national population, as we've been doing so well so far, and we will ensure that there's further law enforcement, more active law enforcement to preserve the conditions that we are asking for, and our public health officers will continue to focus on widening the rings around areas of interest where they might occur from time to time. I'm putting the country on notice now that next week, well, we have an election coming up 2 Mondays from now, but these decisions are not going to be made in the context of any election. They will continue to be made in the context of the information, the data, the science that we are following, and we will take action if next week we find ourselves with further increases and we have to take action next week, we take it. But as of now, we will continue in a measured way, guided by the scientific data and the analyses that we have done, giving us the least exposure, the least risk, and the best option to evade the spread of the virus. At this stage, I think we should have some questions, and out of the questions may come further elucidation from the doctors in particular. And if there's anything you want to ask me, I'm a doctor, but I'm a geologist, so I won't be able to help you there. You want to talk to me, right? Okay, you go.
Crystal Wilson, TTT Limited.
Hi, Crystal.
You mentioned keeping a close eye on how things develop as it pertains to contact tracing and the children writing the SEA exam. Are you or anyone here in a position to tell us whether or not that final decision regarding the exam can also impact the September 1st reopening of school?
Well, if we don't have the results of an exam to take the primary school children to secondary school, we wouldn't have a basis to get them there for the moment. And the schools can be reopened for everybody stay in place. That's one option. The other option is to try and get the exam done, and at least we have something to manage. So as of now, we are in a steady state on that. Right?
The SEA classes that were being allowed, is it that the numbers will now be less than 10 because most classes will consist of more than 10?
If the classes would continue the way they are for the moment.
So more than 10?
Yeah, but they're indoors, eh?
Yeah.
So they will use the indoor spacing. The 10 is for outside of a space that, like in this room, we have more than 10 people in here, but we are within the protocols of the spacing. So indoor you can hold a bit more than 10, but 10 people congregating outside, right? Like in church, if you go to the cathedral now, you'll be allowed to have maybe 200 people. Or you might go to a small church for which 50 people is the maximum you can quite properly do there. So we would maintain the protocols indoors for the children. They would proceed to go forward as we nervously look at any further change in the situation. The minute we get the impression that the risk is too great for the children's population, we will act. At the moment, we think that we can maintain that risk for a moment and see if we can get to where we want to go. But if the changes continue, and the reports are that we are going down that road, we will have to take more drastic action.
And the CPL games, what?
The CPL games are quite different. The CPL games, that's a bubble. Everything that will go on around the CPL will go on in a bubble that does not interact with the national population. They would be coming into the country under the protocols of entry, all having tested negative before. That's one. When they come here, they are confined to the Hilton Hotel, and that becomes a bubble for them. And even in the hotel, groups of 7, and after 7 days, another testing, and then they move out. Then they will go to a venue to play the game, where they will not interact with the population. And so therefore, the CPL is a bubble that has nothing to do with what goes on with the population in the country. And let me just add this, for those who want to make that an issue. CPL pays for its presence here and all the service it gets here. So it's not that we are using our money to bring in people to play cricket while we're leaving people abroad. That is just a conversation of mischief makers. Right? The way we see CPL, the same way we open the factories and keep them open, we open the stores selling cloth and keep them open. CPL is just another business aspect in the country. In this case, it's cricket. It's televised. The benefit we get from it is that we promote the country, which we spend a lot of money doing that. So it has nothing to do with what we do, except we've established very strict protocols. And only this morning, the Minister of National Security and Minister of Health were instructed to make sure that it's written in the arrangements that if any player breaches those protocols, such person would come under exclusion and would not be allowed to participate in the country's affairs. So no player can come out from that protocol and decide to go and take a drink down the road and whatever. We're not tolerating that. The whole operation of the CPL is in a bubble and it's all televised, and that's what it's all about.
Prime Minister, Minister of Health, National Security Minister, Chief Medical Officer.
I'm sorry, Bavita?
Bavita,
I'm not hearing you. I hear you very well. I hear you very well on television, so I know you can speak up.
I'll speak up. So I have 2 questions. Just to follow up on Ray's question about the CPL. How much revenue are you expected to gain from the CPL? As 1. And 2...
I mean that we expect to gain?
Yeah, how much you're hoping, how much revenue you expect would be generated from the CPL?
I don't have a figure, but it's not an insignificant figure, because they would use the services of the Hilton Hotel that we are underwriting right now. So 250 people for 14 days. It's a bit more than that. It's from mid-August to mid-September. It's almost a month.
Yeah.
So that, if you had to pay that hotel bill, just think of what you have to pay. If you have to go to the Hilton and pay a bill from mid-August to mid-September and multiply that by 250, that's just one of the bill, and there'll be other things. But it's an activity that is beneficial to us.
I have another question. I'm not sure if the Chief Medical Officer will be in a position to answer this, but what exactly are we looking for to further roll back on restriction measures? Is it that we're waiting until we reach a specific caseload, compliance from the public? What exactly are we looking for?
You mean that's the discussion, all discussions there.
So it's an ongoing process. So we went from sporadic. So as Dr. Hines would have indicated, we had one case that is linked to a number of cases. There's one particular case that is linked to up to 10 additional cases, which will be contacts. That is considered a cluster. There's another case that is linked to another 4 or 5 cases, so that's another cluster. We're linking them geographically, we're linking them in time, we're linking them based on the potential source of exposure. As the Prime Minister would have indicated, there are unknowns, which is what gives us concern. What we know going forward, meaning the primary, secondary, tertiary contacts, are satisfactory thus far. What we don't know are the hidden contacts that would have infected some people. Now, we had 2 new cases overnight, about 10 o'clock or thereabouts, which are new in terms of the investigation. One of them we have been able to link to another case prior, which is good news. When we find cases that are unlinked, in terms of time and space that we can't link, those are the ones that make us feel uncomfortable, because we have to find the source. We have to see where it is coming from. It means that there are cases or a case outside of what we know that is moving around and can spread this disease to other people. The only way we can find that is if we trace them as opposed to a primary or secondary or tertiary contact, or if they present to one of our health facilities being unwell. So our health facilities have seen since Thursday, not of this week, the week before, we have seen a general increase in the number of viral illnesses presenting to the facilities, not necessarily COVID-19, but other viral illnesses, and we will continue to sample as need be. Okay?
With numbers decreasing from 25 to 10, how do we anticipate come election day? How are we going to manage?
I was just about to clarify that for you. That is one, that's the question that automatically arises. Now the groups, the 10 is not an absolute number, say only 10 people could be around. Congregation, right? If you gather in a group of 10 within the 6 feet and spacing, that's a group of 10. You don't want any more like that. But if you're spaced out, like in a line, right? You're not viewed as a group. Now, on election day, you'll have the indoor part of it where the officers are, and those are normally wide open rooms. And then, of course, there's a line outside. Once the protocol is observed outside, the spacing protocol, then there's no problem. So there would not be a negative effect on the carrying out of the election process. You come in a line, you stand 6 feet from the next person, and you continue a line. The line could be there all day, and you're keeping that spacing or approximate distancing. And of course, we are encouraging people to wear a mask. Wear a mask. We have not considered making the mask wearing mandatory because it is difficult to enforce that if you put it on, and then persons who are not prepared to cooperate, out of sight would be out of mind still. So we still are asking people, if you are going to be in close contact, or if you're going out, once you're going to be out, or if you're in and interacting with people at close quarters, then you wear a mask, because it has now been confirmed in many jurisdictions that the wearing of the mask, which initially was being viewed as not of any importance, it is now firmly recommended in all quarters around the world where sanity prevails that the wearing of a mask contributes. I remember when we started out here, Sean Douglas used to come here in a mask, and his colleagues were sniggering at him. It turns out that the wearing of the mask contributes to the improved situation, and I was told that the Minister of Finance has confirmed it, that we have paid for and have in the national population 500,000 masks already. That's from the government system that the government got.
Correct.
So there should be a lot of masks out there. It's just that people not wearing them. So we're asking people, if you have a mask, wear it. If you don't have one, or you don't have masks available to you, get them, because that is an important part of the response. Because understand something, if these numbers grow, they're not going to grow 10 to 15 to 20. I mean, one person there infected 10 people. 10 people infecting 10 people, it's a geometrical exponential growth. So don't think of it as, well, 12 is going to go to 15, right? Because 12 people infecting 10 apiece, that's a big number, right? It's 120. And then next thing you're by the thousands, next thing you're by the tens of thousands, and all that could happen in a short space of time. So the wearing of the mask is important because it keeps you from spreading what you might have. We said earlier on, let's all assume that we're carrying the virus, and the mask keeps it from being blown to other people around us. And don't be too close to anybody for too long, because then you might be sharing air that is polluted by the virus. So these are the common sense things.
So the wearing of a mask will not be an absolute precondition for entering the polling station?
The polling, the EBC, I think, has put out some regulations today, or the CMO can give us an idea on that.
Correct. Yeah. So the ministry would have been working with the EBC from way back when, and we supplied them with our guideline, which was, I believe, on the 8th of July. The Ministry of Health would have sent a guideline to the EBC. They would have put out their guideline, I believe, yesterday afternoon, late yesterday. So, I mean, the guideline was clear, and it was aligned basically to what we had advised with some small changes, but EBC will be able to clarify any further requirements going forward. We had 2 mock centers with the EBC. We had one yesterday, and we had maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago. They had a mock site, which Ministry of Health was part of, and we continue to work together with the EBC.
My understanding as of now is that you come with your own mask and you're okay. No, there's no issue. All of us are encouraging the wearing of a mask. I understand that masks would be available at the polling station for those who want to comply. I've heard it being said that if a person doesn't want to comply, then there's no law to make them comply, and it's a constitutional right to vote, and so. Nobody's arguing that. We know that there are people in this country, including such the speakers, that even if it's beneficial, they'll do otherwise. We know that. But we expect that citizens being told that this threat is facing us. And there may be a very good reason for someone coming to the polling station and saying, I can't wear a mask because of XYZ, but nobody's going to force a mask on your face or deny you the right to vote. So, as far as of now, my understanding is that voting with a mask would be encouraged.
Let me just further clarify what the Prime Minister and the CMO has said. At the polling booths, I think it will be compulsory that you sanitize before you go in.
Again, it's not
Not, but we are strongly recommending. And I think the persons inside the polling booths will have on masks, correct?
Yeah.
So we have to look at the whole protocol.
I think Minister Young has
I have actually had conversation with the EBC, so let me shed the light on it. The EBC have worked closely with the Ministry of Health, the CMO and his persons. They've finalized their protocols yesterday. They're going to sanitize persons going into polling stations. So the first point of sanitization is going into the polling stations. The second point is the stamps that we're accustomed using. You would have had them in polling booths before, and it was only one stamp tied to a piece of string. They're not using that anymore. They're going to have stamps that are rotating and being sanitized. So whoever goes into the polling booth will have a sanitized stamp in front of them. They're also looking at sanitizing persons as they go into the polling booth, because they dip their finger in the ink. They're looking at that as well. So those are the points of sanitization. Going into the polling station, into the polling booth, you'll be sanitized again, and the stamps you'll be using are sanitized. And the sanitization before you go to ink is for them to look at making sure persons are sanitized before those areas where you'll be mixing. Right? But the EBC is going to talk to this. They are the ones who are in charge of it, and it was only finalized yesterday with the Ministry of Health and the CMO.
So in short, we don't see anything standing in the way of the taking of a poll. Yeah.
And the political rallies, well, I guess that.
Well, we haven't been having political rallies, eh?
But this weekend normally do.
No, well, I don't think anybody was planning to have any rallies. Well, I can't speak for any other political party but the one that I belong to. But what has replaced the political rallies have been a little bit of motorcading with a small amount of walkers. And even so, the group of walkers now need to be reduced, right? Yeah. And all persons out there need to be on with the mask on. And the rally that you normally expect, the big rally at election, the weekend into election, you're not going to see that at all. We haven't had any gatherings, people talking to crowds. We talk to a wider population, but do so through the television and the radio. So we might, like most of our meetings have been like this, where people are physically distanced, indoors and is broadcast to the population.
I want to ask about the recreational sports. Is that confined to 10? And I want to also get your views on some of the statements made by the Commissioner of Police with respect to the Minister of Health, which some people have been alarmed by.
All right, if I may intervene here, Prime Minister. We actually had a meeting, a very, very productive meeting this morning, the Minister of Health, myself as the Minister of National Security, and the Commissioner of Police. And all was dealt with there. It was a very amicable meeting. The parties agreed a way forward, in particular with a particular sporting event. I think with respect to the question as being asked, under the regulations as they stand right now, it's a separate regulation that allows for playing of team sports. And I don't think we've changed that regulation with respect to the playing of the team sports. What we've always said is the gathering of spectators used to be 25 before. That, of course, now will have to be cut down to the 10. And as the Prime Minister said continuously, we will continue to review it. So if the CMO and his team come to us with evidence and data, I'm sure it's something that we will look at. But with respect to the playing of the sports, the Commissioner of Police and the Minister of Health, they had a great elbow bounce, and we're moving forward.
His coaches and his
Well, we had a discussion about that in the Commissioner's Cup, and we're hoping he's gone away to consider it, give it consideration. We came up with a suggestion, maybe a truncated tournament due to the less of time, but we're encouraging him. If he wants to proceed with the Commissioner's Cup tournament, we will work with him, and it can come off.
Let me just explain something about the group of 10. For example, if there's a game going on in Savannah, and 8 people are standing here watching it, that's okay, once they are not in each other's face. And then a little further along the sidelines, another group of 9 people. That's 17 people watching the game. And so around the ground, you could have couple hundred people, but they must not be in any group of more than 10. That allows us to give the virus some difficulty in getting from person to person. So we're not asking you to come out in crowds like that. We're not permitting venues to be open to invite people in to watch the game, but in open areas and physical distancing, it should be relatively easy to organize yourselves into small groups of less than 10 or less.
Following it from the Newsday, you made a statement about greater law enforcement, especially with regards to bars and restaurants. Will there be?
Not just the bars and restaurants. I'm not picking on bars and restaurants. I'm talking about generally. There's a requirement, because we are relying on the public health ordinance now so heavily, and we have got to the stage now where we are dealing with some clusters. We need to make sure that we are enforcing the conditions spelled out in the public health ordinance, which are designed specifically for this kind of purpose. We're no longer promising to have these kinds of situations. It is with us. So we expect that people will obey the regulations, follow the protocols, be sensible. But if you're not going to do that, you're going to run afoul of the Public Health Act. And then we expect that the law will be enforced against you. Right? So you mentioned bars. If you're going to close the bar door and fill it with people inside, the police should know that. If you're going to have a party going on the street in front of your bar, the police are going to close you down, or should. And then, of course, if you are disregarding the law in a restaurant and hosting more than the place should really hold. So it's really a cooperation between all of us, all the agencies. Nobody wants to pick up anybody now to take them to court. Because the last thing you want now is to be having to be handling people and dealing with crowds, right? So the more we cooperate, the less of this we have. And unfortunately, there are still some people in the country who think it's not. I've seen people, some of them who are supposed to be responsible people, telling the population there's no COVID here. And these protocols are government trying to oppress people. Now, that is unhelpful. And then, of course, there are people who are making a career of trying to misrepresent what is being said to the population. But it's still a free country. We can't prevent that from happening. What we're doing is saying to the population, who we are taking you at your confidence and saying to you, we are all threatened by this situation. There's something that you can do. There's something that we must do. And if we do these things together, we will give ourselves a good chance not to experience the worst of this pandemic.
Prime Minister, I just have one more question. Seeing that the public service will be resorting to the roster system, right? Will private companies be expected to do the same?
Well, we have not asked that. We think that the reduction in the movement of people in the country and the population, if we do it in the public service side for the moment, and we observe, see what that does, if it gets to a situation where we require that further reduction from the private sector, well, we have to do that. But we're not going to do it unless we think it is absolutely necessary.
Okay, one final question. There are concerns that the pandemic may have exacerbated certain things in the education sector. That is that some schools continued throughout the period of the lockdown to prepare their SCA students via whether it was online classes or person-to-person. Some schools were actually holding classes in the schools. And there is a view that the playing field, which is not always level, would become even more unlevel in terms of the exams and the preparation given to children from different elements in the education sector, whether it's private schools versus public schools, or even some government schools are more prepared than others. Has the government taken that into account at all?
Well, the question is taken into account how, because that is an observation, yes. It's a reality, yes, but it's not a new one. It's pretty much a continuation of a reality. If you go backwards in time, that same argument was with us when you could say there were some families who could afford to pay for high school education and others didn't. And as a result of that, there was a lopsided development. And then later on, you were saying there are those who can pay for lessons after school and there are others who can't. And those two sets of children, one is disadvantaged, one is privileged. And now the same thing at the national level. And it is only allowed here at the national level because I don't know that there's a logistically sound alternative but to continue. This year, 2020, is a pandemic. There's something causing that. And what is causing it doesn't give us an alternative to level it. But the one good thing about it is that all the children are going to get spaces. It's not like an earlier time when there were only a certain amount of spaces that were available. And those who didn't do well in the exam would have been disadvantaged for life. What I expect to happen, though, is that there probably would be need going down the road if the loss of teaching that obviously took place and obviously would have affected some children, largely the underprivileged children. I could see in the system the need for remedial and catch-up work. And I would leave that to the experts in the Ministry of Education to ensure that as we place the children in the school, because they all are going to be placed, then we take into account that some of them would have been disadvantaged in the way that you have mentioned. Not by being left out of school, but by being in school and may not be as ready as the others would have been. And that has to be taken into account, and I hope that the Ministry of Education will take that into account. And if there's a government intervention, it will have to be somewhere in that kind of area.
Question for the Chief Medical Officer. How are we treating with people who present flu-like symptoms on the day of election at the various polling stations?
They get 2 votes. No, Bavita, they will not get 2 votes.
Right. No, I mean, again, the EBC doesn't have anything, as far as I know, relating to that. But I mean, we will, of course, after you finish doing your voting process, the Ministry of Health has a role. If they're willing to come to the facilities, we will do what we need to do afterwards. So that's the role that we have. But
CMO,
yeah.
Could you just mention what your authority is with respect to quarantine?
Yeah.
And how quarantine comes into
With regards to voting?
Election day.
Yeah, so we would have had persons in quarantine facilities. What I learned from the EBC side of it is that there was a deadline for special voting application, which was a couple Fridays ago. So everyone that we had in our quarantine facilities, EBC provided us with documentation for those individuals to actually apply to be part of the special voting. And they told us once, even if they come out of quarantine prior to it, they will still be eligible to be part of the special voting. So I think we may have had 50 applications from one site and a few others from another site. All of those were sent to the EBC, and those persons will be allowed to take part in the special voting session. The persons that unfortunately come in now, the deadline for application is gone. So we're hoping that they can come out prior to election and be part of the voting process.
So to answer your question is that the EBC does not have the authority to deny anyone the right to vote based on their health condition, but the CMO does. So if a person is deemed by the CMO to be a risk to the public, the CMO could force that person into quarantine, and then what he just said kicks in. So that is the law. That is what can happen. That is what can happen. But it's not. We don't expect that to be happening, right? Like, you know. But that is the only pathway by which somebody could be interdicted.
So the persons in quarantine, they were included in that quarantine.
No, I think the persons in Cora are patients that would have tested positive after the fact. I can't say for sure if any of them would have been in those quarantine facilities prior and applied, but they would be positive patients that are now in hospital. So normal practices in terms of hospital patients will apply. I think the general population, if you have an illness that mandates that you stay in a hospital, you can't go to vote. That's just part and parcel of being ill. So those will apply as normal. Of course, yeah.
So, Prime Minister, many persons online want to be clear when this will start. Is it today or tomorrow? The new measures.
The new measures kick in.
So let me just guide how the measures go in. So from today, the Chief Parliamentary Council, together with the Attorney General, will draft the new regulations. They are then sent to myself, the Minister of National Security, and the Honourable Prime Minister for vetting. Once the three of us sign off on it, then the Minister of Health affixes his signature to it. It then goes to be gazetted, and a cabinet note has to be generated to give effect to it. So that's the process. So that process will start today, and typically it takes about 24 hours. So hopefully by tomorrow, Sunday for the latest.
So I would say we normally get this done within 24 hours.
Yes, normally.
So
Yeah.
the gazetting would done, and it should kick in by Sunday. I would say 6 o'clock Sunday morning. So we give us all of tomorrow to get it done. So we work on it immediately, and it takes, as the minister just said, it has to work through the system. And once I sign off on the documents as produced by the Attorney General's office, it gives you a time when it comes into play.
I have already alerted the Honourable Attorney General prior to this what we were anticipating, and the CPC is actually looking at this press conference to get an idea of what measures she has to draft.
Okay, thank you all very much.